Hello, it's Joe. So in my last monthly wrap-up video, I mentioned how I wanted to replace monthly wrap-ups with videos where I talk about every 5 books that I read, and a lot of you said that you liked that idea, so here I am. As with my monthly wrap-up videos, there will be timestamps and trigger warnings in the description for each of these books if you want to check those out. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first book that I read was Nevernight by J. Kristoff, which I gave 4.2 out of 5 stars. Set in a fantasy world where 3 suns almost never set, this book follows Mia Colvere as she trains to become a fully fledged assassin of the Red Church. So on the face of it, this seems like your very typical fantasy where the main character trains to become an assassin. However, I assure you that this book is far from typical and generic. I heard a lot of people say that this book took them like 80 to 100 pages to get into, but luckily for me, I did not have that problem. I listened to the audiobook of this while also reading it physically, and if you are able to, I would highly recommend that you do the same. The audiobook narrator is superb in my opinion. However, something that I will warn you about is that in both the physical and the audiobook, there are kind of author's notes slash footnotes, I'm not sure what we're meant to call them, but basically you'll be reading a paragraph and then there'll be like an asterisk and it will suddenly skip you down to the bottom of the page where there will be like a paragraph in italics explaining like a bit of the world or the lore, and in the audiobook it literally takes you straight away to the bottom of the page rather than letting you finish a sentence or a paragraph. So that was quite jarring and is part of the reason that this book didn't get the full 5 stars, because I didn't really like that aspect of it, and I thought the notes were kind of interesting but also unnecessary to the overall plot. So if you're someone who really likes to get to know a new world and things like that, then maybe you'll really enjoy them. Personally, I could have done without them. And to be honest, that is kind of the only reason that kept me from giving this book the full 5 stars, because pretty much everything else about this book I absolutely loved. The writing style was dark and beautiful, the characters, especially Mia, were complex and twisted, the plot was intriguing and paced excellently, and the sex scenes in this book are some of the best sex scenes I have ever read, which isn't really saying much because I don't tend to read sex scenes that often, simply because I don't tend to pick up books that include a lot of sex scenes. Don't know why. It's not a conscious thing, it just so happens that out of the books that I've read, there aren't many sex scenes in them. But regardless of that, I thoroughly enjoyed all of the sex scenes in this book and thought they were written beautifully. I have to say, I did guess like the major plot twist of this book pretty early on, which is usually something that would annoy me because I love to be surprised with big twat twists. Because I love to be surprised with big plot twists. However, here I actually didn't mind it and actually loved sort of watching how everything was set up and how it built up to reveal the plot twist, and the payoff was still really good even though it wasn't a surprise to me. If you didn't know, I read to be entertained, and bloody hell, this book was very, very gripping and entertaining. So if you're like me and read to be entertained, then this book will definitely be for you. It's definitely a new favourite in the fantasy genre, and I'm very excited to pick up the next 2 books in the trilogy. So the next book is The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Yee, which I gave 3.9 out of 5 stars. This was the group book for the Avatar The Last Airbender readathon, which I participated in and was hosted by Maylis from Maylis Reads. And this is essentially a prequel story to Avatar The Last Airbender, following Avatar Kyoshi and how she became to be the extremely powerful, legendary Avatar that we all know her as, or at least those of us who've watched the TV show. So as you may know, Avatar The Last Airbender is my favourite TV show of all time, and so I went into this book with very high expectations. I tried not to expect much, but it's very hard, and unfortunately It didn't quite meet the expectations that I set for it. However, I did still enjoy my time reading this book. So the problems I had with it were, firstly, the pacing. It was very slow to start off. I kind of think it would have been better starting off with like a big explosive scene and then sort of going into the slow build-up, whereas it started with the slow build-up and it was a very, very slow build-up, and I was kind of getting a bit bored with it. The pacing did get better towards the end of the book, so I will, you know, give credit where credit is due there. But yeah, the beginning, like the first half of the book, it was quite slow paced. Also, there was something off about the writing style for me personally. I just couldn't sink into it. You know how when you start a new book by an author you've never read before, and it can take like a few chapters to sink into the author's flow? Well, that never really happened for me with this book. I can't really pinpoint exactly what it was about the writing. I think it just felt a bit unpolished and not unfinished, but I don't know, it just didn't flow well to me. It didn't vibe with me. And I also think a lot of the characters were not fleshed out enough for me personally. Even some of the main characters, I really wanted to see more from them, and a lot of them were very two-dimensional. However, despite all of that, the good parts of this book were really enjoyable. There were some really, really amazing scenes that came to life on the page, and of course, I already adore this world, so getting to know more about the world and the history of the world was like really enjoyable to me. If I'm being honest, I wish that they'd made this into another TV series like the original Avatar TV series instead of making it a novel, or at least making it into a graphic novel. I just think a lot of this book would have been told better in a visual format, and particularly in a TV show format, I think it would have done a lot better, in my opinion, anyway. One thing that I should have mentioned earlier on about this book is that it features a sapphic romance, and I liked it, but it kind of came out of nowhere. I think for me, there wasn't enough build-up to the two characters getting together, and I felt like I didn't know either of the characters well enough to be invested in their romance. I did like aspects of it, but I feel like it could have gone deeper and could have been done a lot better. So if you're going into this book just for the sapphic romance, you know, proceed with caution. And also for the Avatar The Last Airbender readathon, I pretty much completed all of the prompts with these next few books that I'm about to tell you about. I can't remember which books fit which prompts, and silly me didn't prepare and didn't write it all down. And so let me just assure you that the next few books that I'm about to talk about all fit the prompts for the Avatar The Last Airbender readathon. Except for the last one, because the last book I didn't read for the readathon and read after the readathon was over. Anyway, the next book that I read was The Golden Compass, or The Northern Lights, by Philip Pullman, which is the first book in the His Dark Materials trilogy, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Set in a parallel world to our own, where people's souls live outside their bodies in animal forms known as demons, this book follows our main character, Lyra. She is a young girl who goes on an epic quest to find all of the children that have been going missing across the country, including her best friend, Roger. She's given an alethiometer, which is also called a golden compass, which is an instrument of truth, which she must try and figure out how to use on the way. So this was a reread for me. I read it as a kid, and there is a TV adaptation coming out very soon in November, and I wanted to refresh my memory on this book before the TV show came out. Unfortunately, I did not love this as much as I remember loving it when I was a kid. I actually, before rereading it this time, considered this to be one of my favourite books that I've ever read, but now I would not say that. Let me just explain, right? So, the first half of the book, I have to say, I was completely swept away by the world and the adventure and the magic of this book. However, it's the second half of the book that really brought my opinion down. I loved Lyra's time with the Egyptians. For some reason it made me feel quite warm and nostalgic. Maybe it's because I live near a canal and see canal boats a lot and I picture Egyptians living on canal boats. But after Lyra left the Egyptians, all of my warm fuzzy feelings seemed to change, and that's kind of where the book went downhill for me. The main problem I had with this book was the fact that there were far too many plot conveniences happening. There were so many things happening that just shouldn't have been able to happen, and ultimately I feel like the plot was driving the characters in this book, when I personally feel like the characters should always be driving the plot. Characters were doing things that made no sense. The dialogue just did not feel real, and the pacing ended up being all over the place. The very last chapter of this book was honestly one of the worst endings to a book that I have ever read, and I do not remember hating it as much when I was a kid, but this time I really hated it. It was so nonsensical and confusing that it just left me feeling very angry and frustrated. And if it wasn't for the first half of the book being so enjoyable for me, I really think that I would have rated this 2 stars or even less, which is shocking because, again, I considered it to be one of my favourite books ever. I just really hope that the TV show adaptation is good. I've heard good things so far because the world premiere that all the celebrities go to was like the day before yesterday, and there were a lot of tweets saying that the first episode is amazing, but I'm gonna, keep my expectations low. Well, I'm gonna try. And I'm gonna hope that the TV series does a better job of ending this book than the book did. So the next book that I read was This Is Kind of an Epic Love Story by Kaysen Calendar. Those of you with, eagle eyes may notice that I said Kaysen Calendar and on here it says Karen Calendar. Basically, the author changed their name to Kaysen, I believe, when they came out as non-binary, but I am not 100% sure that that's the case. I know that the author is non-binary, and I know that they changed their name from Karen to Kaysen. I'm just not sure whether those things happen at the same time. But regardless, it's called This Is Kind of an Epic Love Story, and it's by Kaysen Calendar. And I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. This follows a 16-year-old boy named Nathan Bird, whose best friend / ex-girlfriend that cheated on him wants him to find love again. Enter Nathan's childhood best friend Oliver, who returns to their town, and him and Nathan try and re-establish their old bond. This is a very diverse book in terms of race, sexuality and ability, and I just wanted to mention that first because I think it's really important and is probably one of, if not the best aspect of this book. I think the book started off really well, however my opinion slowly and then very quickly went downhill. What it all boils down to essentially is that there is just too much teenage angst in this book for me. The relationships between the characters were just so messy, and there was just so much back and forth that I feel like there was no time to really get invested in any of the relationships because they were flip-flopping and cheating and doing all these things with each other that just drove me mad, and I ended up just getting annoyed with every single relationship in this book, and so I wasn't rooting for any of them, and I didn't care what was going on. The ending felt very rushed to me, and there is one scene towards the end where the characters are basically romanticising the way that Ross and Rachel in Friends, that their whole situation ends up with I got off the plane and all that. And I hate how that ended up in Friends. I love Friends, but the whole Ross and Rachel thing just really annoys me. And the fact that that was romanticised in this book kind of left a bitter taste in my mouth that I didn't really like. There were some cute scenes and very positive messages about consent in particular, which is why my rating isn't any lower, but they didn't really make up for all the negative things that I just mentioned. So unfortunately, overall, I didn't really enjoy this book. And the fifth book that I read was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This follows a woman named Monique who is personally chosen to write the biography for Hollywood starlet Evelyn Hugo, who isn't real and was never real, but she feels very real. And so along with Monique, we get to learn about Evelyn's life, including her 7 marriages and who her true love really was. And Evelyn Hugo is bisexual, so there's that as well. So this was my second time reading this book. I read it a year ago, and recently I just got the very strong urge to pick it back up again, and honestly I loved it just as much, if not even more, than the first time I read it. I felt completely engrossed and enraptured in this book from beginning to end, and I just think Evelyn Hugo is one of, if not the best written character I've ever read about. I actually feel honoured to have read about her life, and she isn't even a real person, but I just feel so blessed to be able to be alive at the same time as this book, because Evelyn Hugo is just everything to me. The romance in this book is beautiful. The friendship between Evelyn and Harry is one of my favourite friendships ever, and if you know me, then you'll know that friendships in books just mean everything to me. So Evelyn and Harry just make me so happy, and every scene that they were in together just filled me up with pure joy, and I absolutely loved it. This will definitely not be the last time I read this, and I'm actually considering buying a second copy of this book just so I can lend it to other people, because I just feel like more people need to read this book. I know it's very popular across BookTube and a lot of people on BookTube have read it, but in my real life no one else that I know has read it, so I just need everyone to do that, and so I think I'm going to get a second copy to give out to other people. And yeah, this second read has cemented this book as one of my favourite books of all time, and probably my favourite standalone book of all time, and I just adore it so much. So those are the 5 books that I read recently. Let me know if you've read any of them in the comments below and what you thought of them. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a like or a thumbs up. If you think you like more of my videos, then subscribe below. All of my social media links will be down in the description if you want to check those out. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day. Goodbye.